Hello, everyone. This is the fifth in a series of videos meant to help you to prepare for our final exam. And in this one, we'll be focusing on Peter Singer's Famine, Affluence, and Morality. Again, let me say one more time, the final exam will consist of a series of hypothetical scenarios, and you'll have to write an ethical analysis of each, employing the ideas of a particular author or school of thought when it comes to utilitarianism. And I think we've seen how that is, can be done uh, using the ideas of people like Thompson and Marquis, and that, you know, again, it's a little bit smoother to say, well, apply a Kantian decision-making framework or a utilitarian framework to a particular scenario, come up with an answer. It's maybe a little, as I said, a little bit more counterintuitive or a little bit more subtle to apply the ideas of a Thompson or a Marquis to an issue other than what they're specifically talking about, addressing abortion. But I think we've seen how that pretty easily could be done. And I think that when we look at Peter Singer, it's most obvious that although he's talking about giving to charity, and that is his focus, he wants to change the world. He wants people to change their whole attitude about what their moral duties are in terms of helping people globally as much as they can. That his ideas here far transcend the particular issue of giving to charity. And in fact, I would say that as far as understanding what utilitarianism is, Singer helps us to understand what utilitarianism is, a particular interpretation of what utilitarianism is and what it would mean to actually follow the greatest happiness principle adjusted to make it a moral imperative, the maximizing the happiness of that exists in the world and minimizing the unhappiness. I think it really is reading Singer that he gives us a particular interpretation of what the moral duties are of of a utilitarian, somebody who thinks like a utilitarian, and that comes, of course, on the third page, I guess, page 836, the third page of the reading, where he says in the middle of the page, I begin with the assumption that suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care are bad. Of course, that's addressed to the particular argument or the particular issue having to do with world hunger and suffering and kind of things that were happening in East Bengal, otherwise known as Bangladesh, in the early 70s. But one could say that, what he's basically saying there is that bad things are bad, that the things that we commonly recognize to be misfortunes and bad things, we all recognize them. That is, we recognize that there are bad things in the world. It's the next point that is the real thing that he's getting at, and that is, second principle. My next point is that if it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, we ought morally to do it. So, again, I think that this is a particular interpretation of what it means to think like a utilitarian. There are bad things in the world, or there's suffering, there is unhappiness, and that is just sort of taken for granted. And then a utilitarian, I think of the Mill sort, would say that, well, if we can prevent a bad, if we can prevent unhappiness without sacrificing anything of comparable more importance ourselves, we should do it. Seems to be that's the imperative. So, and there, the complications obviously begin because this is what we are calling in our class, or we're calling Singer's second principle. And this is also what Arthur will call the greater moral evil rule. It's, interpreted in a certain way. But look at the way that he actually puts it. If it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable more importance, we ought morally to do it. And that has nothing specifically to do with world hunger. That just is a general moral rule. And he immediately illustrates that, right? That if I'm walking by, as he said, top of the next page, an application of this principle would be as follows. If I am walking past a shallow pond and see a child drowning in it, I ought to wade in and pull the child out. That is, I'm not sacrificing anything of comparable more importance to a child drowning by wading in and saving them. So this obviously has to do with the way he feels about our obligations to give to charities that would prevent suffering and death on the part not only of the world's children, but of the world's human beings. Now, of course, and what's important, I would say, what's absolutely important is to note that there are two versions of this second principle, or two versions of what Arthur would call the greater moral evil rule. That is that if I can prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, I ought to do it. That's the strong version. And then there's the more moderate version. If I can prevent something bad from happening, or as he said, something very bad from happening, without sacrificing anything of any moral importance, I should do it. These are, of course, two versions of the same rule, but they have very different consequences. Right? It's quite obvious that the stronger version requires me to give until I reach that point of marginal utility where giving any more would reduce me below the level of the people I'm trying to help. I think, for instance, here, if I see somebody drowning and I'm thinking of jumping in and trying to save them, there we are in a situation where my potential sacrifice, especially if I'm not a good swimmer or it's particularly hazardous conditions, reaches the point where if I were to try to save this person, I would almost surely be dying myself. And then, the question of comparable moral importance comes up, and it probably would have no obligation to do it. That would be an example of reaching that level of marginal utility. But if we're talking about the more moderate, version, then if I can prevent something very bad from happening, or just something bad from happening, without sacrificing anything of any moral importance, I should do it. That would be the more moderate version. No, of course, it's all very simple. Or it seems on the surface to be very simple, the way that he lays it out. But of course, judgments need to be made all along the way because things are not clear. How do we judge something to be of comparable moral importance? If I have to give up my life to save somebody else's life, then that's a pretty clear instance where I've reached the level of something of comparable moral importance. But certainly if I can prevent people's hunger by going hungry myself, well, how hungry are we? I mean, if I can prevent somebody from going hungry by being hungry one day a week, should I do it? I mean, is that of comparable moral importance? He doesn't say equal moral importance, because of course, if he had said equal moral importance, the whole game would be given away, because we have no idea in most situations what that would possibly mean. It's easier to sort of fake it a little bit and say comparable moral importance, because then we say, oh yeah, well, things on the same level, but not exactly equal. So what I'm saying is that both versions of the second principle are fuzzy. They require judgment on our part. What does it mean for something to be of comparable moral importance? And then if we look at the more moderate version, what does it mean for something to be of no moral importance? There, I think Singer is really, maybe at his weakest point, because that's a matter of opinion. I mean, Peter Singer doesn't care about clothes, right? It just does not matter to him what kind of clothes he wears. So giving up new clothes to contribute to charity would be, for him, giving up something of no moral importance. But some people, clothes matter. It's part of their, you know, their lives, and the joy that they take in life is the joy they take in fashion or clothing. So to say that's not of great moral importance, maybe we'd agree about that, but I think we disagree about something being of no moral importance. Or my own examples in class where I talked about buying an old book instead of just getting it out of the library. If I'm following Singer, I guess, then I shouldn't buy any books that I can't get just reading at the library, and I should give all the money that I save to charity. I mean, I can see that as being a very plausible position. But the notion that having nice old books and reading them in nice old editions is of no moral importance, I would deny that. It's of some moral importance. The question is it of enough moral importance? And in my judgment, I would choose it over helping somebody else who's dealing with very serious problems like hunger and lack of medical care. I mean, it's a judgment that needs to be made. So I think that it's quite clear that Singer's rule here, the second principle, is of great applicability to almost everything in life. It really helps define what it means to be a utilitarian. And as he says here, I guess what page is this? 840. That wonderful word supererogatory comes up. His claim that things like giving to charity are not supererogatory. That is, if we accept the second principle in some form, we've accepted that giving things up in order to prevent bad things happening to other people is not supererogatory. It's not good Samaritanism. It's not moral heroism. It's just simply doing what we have ourselves admitted we should do. It's not going above and beyond. Giving to charity is not just good to do, it is bad not to do it. Because preventing a bad thing from happening without giving up anything of either comparable moral significance or any moral significance is not supererogatory. It's something that it would be bad not to do. Again, on our own admission, because this all flows from our admission of the second principle, or what Arthur calls greater moral evil rule.